Here. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our latest Q&A Agency event. My name is Joshua Handler. I'm the co-founder and lead programmer for the Q&A Agency. It is my pleasure to welcome back cinematographer Alice Brooks and editor Myron Kerstein to talk about Wicked for Good. I hope some of you guys were here for last year's discussion with the two of them, but we love having you here, Myron and Alice, and thank you so much for joining us again to discuss the second part.
Thank you so much.
Um, a
Thank you,
huge th
Joshua. It's such a pleasure. Yeah.
Well, it's a pleasure. A huge thank you to our sponsor for this evening's event, Universal Pictures. We are thrilled to be working with you guys again. Thank you so much for the support, as well as our year-round supporting partners and sponsors. Our premier sponsor, the American Cinema Editors, and our year-round sponsors, the Baton Rouge Film Commission and the Dallas Film Commission. Where to begin? And also, one quick note to our audience. Thank you so much for your wonderful questions. We received so many great questions from you, and we're going to try and get to as many as possible. I apologize for those whose questions we don't get to, but we're going to try and get to as many as possible. So thank you to those in the audience for your great questions. Lisa from our audience says, did you observe how part one was being received by audiences and then make editing decisions for part two based on these observations, Myron?
Well, of course. I mean, the reception of part one was pretty amazing. It was also terrifying to have a film received in a way that was like, okay, this was just meant so much to so many people. To celebrate my work with Alice and John and the rest of the team, it was just, it was incredible. But it was also really intimidating to like meet the bar of that second movie. So, in a lot of ways, trying to embrace the themes of the first movie, but also that the second movie was so different from the first movie. And so, in a lot of ways, there was things about the first movie that we couldn't like duplicate in the second movie. It's a flash forward in time, and we were dropping into a dystopic land, and the first film was about choices, and the second film was about consequences, and we were now in the middle of a melodrama and a political thriller and a tragedy and something that was very operatic. And so, in a lot of ways, we couldn't bring the joy and delight and whimsicalness of the first movie to the second. But what we did have is that we had this relationship, and to focus on the relationship and knowing that the audience loved these two characters and that they're willing to go on this journey with us because we had established this friendship that worked in the first film, and then we could carry that all the way to the end, to make a musical number like For Good to feel emotionally resonant and powerful, and that goodbye felt and earned. That was what I took into the edit of the second film. It's like everything else doesn't matter. And so, as much as I always like the action sequences and the choreographic, the dance numbers by Chris Scott and his choreography, it's about this relationship. It's not. And so, to carry that all the way through was the biggest challenge, but also the thing I knew I had in the back pocket the entire time.
Speaking of the For Good sequence, I mean, it was so wonderful seeing this for the first time and seeing how you two just and John and your entire team just landed this entire thing emotionally. I mean, we'd already sat through 4.5 hours of film by that point, and then you come to this unbelievable emotional climax. We'll dig into that a little bit more in a moment. But Alice, I want to direct this at you, and then Myron, please feel free to chime in on this too, because I'd love your take. But Alex from our audience and Ariane and Henry had very similar questions. Said, did you need to make any changes to your normal creative process, knowing that both Wicked and Wicked for Good would be filmed simultaneously?
Yeah, this is for me, right, Joshua?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Okay,
And
great.
Myron, please feel free to chime in too.
Um, I mean, it was, we are shooting part one in the morning some days and part two in the afternoon. And For Good was a cover set, meaning we were outside shooting in Munchkinland for the opening scene, the opening number of the first movie. And suddenly it's going to rain for a week in the UK. So the only set that was not even ready, almost ready, was the parapet. And so suddenly you're shooting the end of the second movie instead of the beginning of the first movie. and you find that out at like noon the day before. And so it was constantly it started small, right? Like John Chu and I start every idea very small, and it's like one word intentions. I think we talked about this last year. And then we start to share images, and we build an image catalog. And then I create something called a color script, so you could see what the movie, the one, I took one still as a reference for every scene in the entire movie, both movies, and put them on my wall. And if you stood back and looked at it, you could see the entire visual arc of both movies. But each movie also has its own distinct visual style. And so within a day, I had to track that as well. And but every single camera choice, every single movement, color choice, lens choice, framing choice, every single one of those is rooted in an emotional intention that John and I discussed very early on. Just like an actor has an emotional intention, and they use their voice and their being to tell a story. We can't hear you.
Oh, no, no, no. That's no, I was about to say absolutely. No,
Okay.
I think that's the fact that it's all rooted in emotion is I think what so many of us have responded to. And I think it's one of the reasons why this film will go on and on and on. And I think it's one of the reasons why the musical has gone on for so long as well. One of speaking of emotion, one of the most emotionally resonant scenes is the girl in the bubble sequence. It's something that obviously was not in the stage show, and it is astonishing what you two pulled off. Rafaela from our audience, and also credit to Anita, Carla, Ariane, Alex, Madison, Mathieu, Bren, Sudipta, Shalome, Aurora, Kelly, and Christina, who also wanted to ask about this sequence. So this is a very popular one. They would love to know how that sequence was shot and cut. Rafaela says the steady cam shots and seamless transitions are incredible. How did you manage to match the shots in post, Myron? Did you crop in? Did you set CGI markers in the mirrors? They want to know everything about this, from initial conception, Alice, to Myron, your work in post.
Okay, I guess I'll start since it's
Please take us through the
since
evolution.
so John, the emotional. We started talking about the emotion of the scene, and about it being about looking in the mirror and seeing the person you've become and the stories we tell ourselves that make us into who we are. And John wanted to do this all in a mirror, but he's like, I can't sustain 3.5 minutes of a song with Ariana just standing there singing in a mirror. And then we started Googling like the greatest mirror movie shots of all time. And John and I have wanted to do a oneer forever. We tried really hard in the Heights to do one, and then we ended up the reality just didn't work. It's the same. We always wanted to do a dance on the side of the building, side of a building, and 12 years later we did the number in the Heights. And so then he's like, well, what if we can do a oneer inside a mirror? And so we started Googling the greatest mirror movie shots of all time. And everything, I mean, I think there's a whole reel anyone can Google, but Contact became our biggest inspiration. Zemeckis' Contact. And there's this amazing shot in Contact where young Ellie, young Jodie Foster, runs up the stairs and reaches for a medicine cabinet as her dad's having a heart attack, and you realize the entire thing has happened in a mirror. And so John is like, what if we never know if we're in a mirror or out of a mirror? And so we started developing what it could be. And in the middle of the night, one night, I woke up knowing we were going to have a big production meeting about it the next morning. And I took my husband's shaving mirror and my daughter's bath toys. And with my iPhone, I started shooting how we could potentially do it, knowing there were 3 mirrors on the set. But the problem is there were only 3 mirrors and we needed 4. And so we had 2 on either side of the balcony, or right inside the doors next to the staircases, and the one above the second staircase. And then we created a new one, which was going to be in the Hall of Memories, so that we could have 4, so we could get out of the mirror finally. And it's 3 steady cam shots and 2 crane shots, and then some reflection plates. But like we could use this the full 50 minutes to discuss this, but basically what we do is we start on Ariana, we're leading her back, we start to arc around her at steady cam, we push into the mirror, and that mirror is blue. And so then to get a reflection, you need a shot that looks like a reflection, you need to double your distance. You can't just put the camera at the mirror plane. So we have a set that goes 45 feet up in the air. And so special effects had to make it so it could hinge open and build a platform beyond, so I could put the camera 15 feet back. And that becomes our second steady cam shot. And so we start pushing in on Ariana. And then as soon as we break the mirror plane, the wall closes, hinges close with special effects rig behind us, and I start to arc around, and there you see the walls back in place, and we come and we spin up. We're still only on our second shot, and we look up at the mirror above us. And as we push into the mirror, once we're once we're flush with the mirror, then we end up on a 45-foot techno crane shot, which we had to move a different wall to get the crane in. And we start pushing down on Ariana. And again, we needed to get the right distance. This is all shot on a 40 millimeter lens. And that shot takes her up. This is the third shot, takes her up the stairs. And this is where our only stitch that happens on not in a on the not in a mirror, on her back. And as she crosses on her back, we now are on our fourth shot, and it's a steady cam shot to pull us through the hall of memories, the closet. And then as we pull back over her shoulder, we're back on the techno crane, the 45 techno crane, which takes her down what appears to be a different staircase, but it's actually the same staircase that she went down. And then the last shot, we pull out of a mirror, out of the fourth mirror, and pull a steady cam out to the balcony where she sees her reflection. And her reflection, I'm not counting that as a separate shot, but that's one of the reflection plates, and there's an earlier other reflection plate. And then but that ends our winner. So and then we have lots of different takes, and we get to hand it off to Myron, who calls me at night. He's like, "What is going on?"
I mean, first of all, Alice Brooks. I mean, it's just like, it is just, what's amazing about working with Alice and John is that there's a real sort of almost, still kind of a film school sort of attitude, rebelliousness about, okay, we want to do this thing. We want to challenge ourselves. We think there's this amazing theme with Glinda and her and being trapped in the bubble, and this motif of mirrors and reflections, and like, can we make a musical number out of all these things and put it together and make something out of it? And it's really sort of this I don't know, this guerrilla filmmaking, but we have all these toys to play with, and then we have a film production unit that could then sort of pivot with Alice, because Alice is just an incredible communicator with her team, to then say, let's do this, or now let's change it this way. And so to pull off something like this is just incredible. I still don't know how you did it. It's like it's like I just put the pieces together, and then it ends up working. And then Pablo Hellman and ILM and their team is like, we need a year to do this stitch, because we have to track Emerald City in the background, and we got to make sure that all these pieces actually work well together. And oftentimes what happens is production often says on set, it's got to be this take or that take, because on the day we thought for sure this is the way it's got to be, right? And then I come into post and say, well, actually it's none of these takes, or it's a mix and match. And so what happened very late in this process is, like, ILM said we needed a year, but then John and I very late in the game was like, well, we're gonna actually switch out some of these takes, because we think Ari's performance is even more grounded and unique and beautiful, and there was something even more special about this camera move. But I love the sort of synergy between this just incredible choreography of movement and emotion with Ari's performance, and then this magic trick with post. And so,
And I do have to
really
say, no
impressive.
two takes were the same at all. Not just for Ariana, but we're doing live singing, and so And so we didn't want to do something with a repeatable, like we could have matched things with a repeatable head, shooting with time, syncing to time code, but we didn't do that on this movie at all. And so each take is subtly different. And our Steadicam operator had to nail the first frame and the last frame of each shot so everything would line up. So, but everything inside the rest of each of those 5 shots is every take's different. And because she could take an extra breath and I would do this subtle lighting cue, the dimmer board operator and the gaffer would stand right next to me and we would slightly change the way the lighting cue would happen, and it makes you no one notices that, but it makes you feel something. And so it's all improvised and live and feels handmade and imperfect. And we had to, through that whole sequence, we had to like there weren't any practicals built into the set. Nathan and Lee Nathan Crowley and Lee Sandals, our production designer and set decorator, had all these beautiful like table lamps throughout the set, but and also furniture everywhere. And John had to go in and strip out all the furniture because he wanted it to all feel very simple. And I needed lighting up the stairwell and next to both mirrors at the bottom of the stairs, which weren't built in. And Nathan and I finally worked out a plan that the lights next to the mirror, he didn't feel like lights there were like practicals, but he realized he could build architecturally these columns out of resin, which was the same material that they were building the Ozdas ballroom out of, and I could light it from inside. And so we put LED tape on the inside, and also it made it light enough because the wall has to move out of the way. That light has to move out of the way as well. And so it's all it took, so from the time we like had that production meeting in the morning, that morning after I brought my daughter's dolls and the mirror to the production office. We had this great room called the War Room where we all just explored every morning, and we all played with the dolls that morning. And then we had a storyboard artist draw it, and then Pablo Hellman created a tech viz so that we knew exactly what distance we needed to be, so that the mirror trick worked. But we couldn't cheat anything because Ari has a dimple, and so she's not symmetrical. So even though the set is fairly symmetrical, her face isn't symmetrical. And then Pablo also is like, okay, when she wipes the camera at the top of the stairs, just have her whole back fill the frame. And John and I are like, no, we can't do that. If you do that, the magic is broken. That magic trick is broken. And so we worked it out so that we could make it happen as a morph. And then there was and Ariana's skirt was 5 feet wide in diameter. And so there were moments we couldn't get the camera close enough to her. And so while she's doing this, there are sometimes like there are people who are catching her skirt, holding her skirt back so that the camera can then get close enough to her. So it really did take every single department to make this number. And that's what I love about filmmaking is like the creativity we all had as a team.
Alice, first of all, that it was such an amazing answer. Thank you for how much detail you just went into on that. But I just want to just dig into, you just used the word handmade. And I remember when I saw the first film last year, I wrote to you to tell you how much I loved the film's handmade feel. And there's something about the productions that you two have done together, whether it be working with Lynn on Tick Tick Boom or the films that you've done with John, they all have this handmade feel, despite the fact that obviously some of them have a sizable budget and are, very large blockbuster films. It's remarkable that you have been able to retain that feel, just across
I
all of
think
these
that
years.
I think it's the craftsmen, it's all the hearts in the craftsmen on the set carrying all the way through to post. And so when we make films like In the Heights, you feel Washington Heights embedded into the film. And when you create Oz, I think that you feel the craftsmanship of all the scenics and the costume department and the production. And it's the same thing with post. Like you feel the hearts of all these craftsmen pouring through the veins of these movies. And I think that it's top down, of course, from John and Alice all the way through post with me. And it's that attitude that I think is really different. And I think that our movies are not always perfect, but I think there's a humanity in these movies that is unmatched with anything else that anyone's ever made. I know when I was making In the Heights and Wicked that I would feel every day goosebumps, not just because, oh my God, I can't believe I'm making these musicals, but I was feeling humanity pouring through. And I think that people who could connect to these movies emotionally connect to it in that way.
I think that, and so much of it is the fact that, as you both were talking about, this they were sung live, which leads me to a question from Abby in our audience, and Jed had a similar one too. So thank you both for this. Abby writes, Myron, I've always been fascinated by how editing musicals works, especially in regard to the songs. I know everyone's saying live on set, so there were moments when editing a musical number where you preferred the visual. Were there moments when editing a musical number where you preferred the visual of one take but liked a vocal choice more in another take? How do you decide which aspect is more important, or do you just find the one that complements both best? And do you have any examples of that?
Thank you. It's a great question. I mean,
Great
let's just
question.
use for good as an example. The first setups for good, we ended up having a lot of crane shots and a lot of sweeping crane shots of going through this balcony and feeling the epic nature of one of the final songs in Wicked. Oh my God, we have to like swoop around the camera and we have to make this as grand and big as possible. We could swoop around the entire castle. We could get ILM to make the most incredible shots, and there could be monkeys flying around as they're singing. And then John and Alice ended up spending the weekend, because it was a cover set, to like think about what other coverage going. And then they started shooting this really intimate footage of close-ups, and then this 360 shot that actually mimicked Defying Gravity. And what I found as soon as I started seeing this footage, I was like, oh no no no, we can't. This number has to be really intimate, and it has to be about um, uh, uh, the these two characters saying goodbye to each other, and the pain and the and how emotional that is. And so I found myself, even though I love these crane shots, I wanted something to be visually spectacular. I knew I had to actually lean in towards the intimacy. And as I did that more and more, I found myself connecting to it more emotionally. And of course, once we started presenting that to an audience, we really started to feel like we're on the right path. You never always know. Um, even when I was working on In the Heights, I had this tendency of wanting to really cut between all the different dancers, because this was about community, and there was a texture to using to cut to a lot of the dancers. And what we found when we were working on Wicked, that there was a certain amount in both movies, there was a certain amount of restraint, and we use that word restraint over and over again, because we did just because we could do something didn't mean necessarily that we should. And so we can make any shot in Wicked. We could fly across Oz during a musical sequence. But what we found again and again is like it's about these two women and them saying goodbye to each other, and that intimacy just really locked in. It just felt so beautiful when once we were just like, no, it's about them. Don't. It's not about the crane shot. It's not about. It's about. It's
Yeah,
about
I mean,
two
while we
movie
were
stars
shooting,
looking at each other. Yeah.
oh no, go ahead. What were you saying?
I was gonna say it's about these two movie stars looking in
Oh,
each other's eyes, and
yeah.
and their tears, and then it's just so powerful to have been part of.
Yeah, while we were shooting that number, we were doing these crane shots, and it was a Friday evening, and we were about to go away for the weekend. And in the stage show, for good, they sing out to the audience. Elphaba and Glinda sing out to the audience. But of course, that's not our medium. We're shooting a movie. They can't sing out to the land beyond Oz, which is the impassable desert, which is beyond out in the vista. And so they're obviously looking at each other, and I wasn't feeling anything. And it's the best song in both movies, And I went over to John, and he wasn't feeling it either. And we realized we needed to go back to what the original intention was. And it was this love story between these two women. And how did we have them fall in love in the beginning? And it was in this 360 shot and these intimate close-ups. And in Defying Gravity, they have their goodbye in a 360 shot. And so we realized we needed to do those shots again for this. But doing a 360 shot, it doesn't work suddenly because it's a lot of lighting, and also we're on the edge of a parapet that has a 12-foot drop below, so I had no place for the Steadicam operator to go. So we did this. So we came back the following Monday, I think, and did this 360-degree camera shot. But John went to the actors and said, "Okay, you're gonna have to do this again," but he also wanted them to be able to say goodbye to each other, and he wanted that to happen at the same time. And so there's a split screen, an in-camera split screen that we did where we ripped the wall out, so that they could finish for good, and then we could go and almost immediately go shoot their goodbye to each other. And we did it as an in-camera split screen so that Elphaba and Glinda could say goodbye to each other at the same time. We didn't go, okay, whose coverage are we going to do first? And we just sit there. And I love how long Myron didn't cut. He just let that moment extend and just be what it feels like to not know what's just about to happen, and to know you're never going to see this person you love so much ever again. And all the creative choices that Myron makes it's I mean it's complete magic. And also watching his process, because when I did first see the cut, the crane shots were in there, and so he needed, just like I needed to find that didn't work, at least for me, he needed to find that those crane shots didn't work for him. And then he needs to make the choice while they're singing who it's close up they're going to cut to. And sometimes you're not on the person singing, and sometimes they're singing at the exact same time. And all those choices are just magic. I just think, I think Myron's a magician.
If we start crying during this, I apologize to the audience. Right? Yeah, it's I remember seeing the dailies of both the Ozdust Ballroom in part one and the dailies for Good over the course of a few days on both of those numbers. Because they took time to shoot, and when you start feeling the magic and the emotion, and then you're just so excited to build these scenes. But it's also very intimidating because you have Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande bringing it with take after take after take, and you're like, it doesn't seem like there is a wrong choice, but there is a choice. And so you're really trying to really connect with your gut and your emotion as the editor, and trying to feel, even though you don't want to be on set while they're shooting, but to understand why they're making the choices, the actors, John, Alice, on the day, and then connecting to it, and then bringing that all the way through the audience, that sort of handmade feel, that how we're all connecting through this footage and the choices of that day, and then bringing it all the way to the end. And so I'm really proud about how people experience, whether you connect to this movie or not. I'll just leave that. Sorry about the helicopter. This is Los Angeles. I
We
apologize.
can't hear it at all.
Can't hear it. Don't
Okay,
worry.
all right. It's really it's amazing when people connect to that scene, and then when for me, for Good is this powerful scene of them saying goodbye and stretching that scene, and to really tapping the brakes on the pace of that scene and really stretching out the emotion. I love that. And then in the closet, them saying goodbye tomorrow to each other and saying "I love you," which was improv, and that it feels so fleeting and so quick, and then you get to hold on this two shot, and then it's this just powerful release, is just magical and cinematic. And anyways, I'm just so proud of it, how it all came together.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that in-camera split screen. I think that is the shot of the film. And as Alice pointed out, Myron, the fact that you held on it for as long as you did, I love the fact that you two, Myron, especially with your work, the fact that these films are never in a rush. They are so well paced, but they're not in a rush. You're not like checking boxes trying to get from one moment to please, the musical's fans to another. This is a story that takes its time, and it takes all the time that it needs. You were talking about how the "I love you" was something that was improvised. Kelly from our audience was wondering, were there any other last minute changes made to the planned shots due to improvisation of the actors or any other onset happenings? And Myron, I want to direct this at you after Alice answers. What were things that you really had to improv that you had to rethink in post? Alice, let's start with you.
So me rethinking during the shooting. I mean, every day is different on a John Chu movie. We prep. We spent 2 years in pre-prep before we ever set foot in the UK, and and then we're there for however many months before we actually started shooting. And so prepping, and we've drawn storyboards and we've shot listed and we know what our goals are for each scene. And then the actual shoot day comes, and John gets to set about an hour before call time, sometimes more. And I always find out what time he's going to be there. I ask his driver what time he's getting picked up so I can beat John there. And I'm in the dark sound stage. The lights aren't on yet. Other people are eating their breakfast on the perimeters, but no one's in the set except for the two of us. And I start to watch him walk through the set, and we don't acknowledge each other's presence at all. But he just is moving around as if he's Elphaba or Glinda or Fiyero, and he's picking up the props. And now I can see a different side of how things are going to happen. And my job, I feel, is to observe him and get into his head and know exactly the story that now that we're here, finally on the day we've been planning for so long, what are we actually going to make? What are the ingredients that go into this recipe, and then how do we shoot it? And so then around call time, the actors come to set and he starts rehearsing. And again, it's not very many people at this point. And while he's blocking it with the actors, I start to walk around, and instead of just thinking about the motion of the scene, I start to walk around and look at angles. And then he usually goes, after rehearsal's done, he's like, okay, we're going to start where, we're going to put camera where, and he looks for me and he's like, where Alice is. And that's where we start our day. And then we finally speak to each other, and we go and we figure out, okay, what's our war plan for the day? How are we going to attack this? And but we start with that first shot. And so it's always evolving, because the actors bring something, right, like during that blocking rehearsal, then the actors are also bringing something new. And that's the thing, we're always leveling up every single day within making it. And I love when John says, and this will lead to Myron, that the movie is made over and over and over again. You first make it during prep or writing, then you make it during prep, then you make it while you're shooting, then you make it while you're editing, then you make it in the sound mix, then you make it in the final DI. And so I'll pass that off to Myron for his side of it, after we pass
Yeah,
things off to him.
yeah, that the film is alive all the way until they rip it away from your dead hands. It's just like you just feel like there's always something new to explore, whether it's improv or a new way, the cutting structure of a scene. The structure of the overall film. I'll just say, for like a couple examples, for on No Good Deed, for example, we had a lot of just amazing crane shots. No shortage of spectacular ways to edit that number together. But there was one particular take where we're on Cynthia's face and the wind is blowing on her, and Alice has this amazing light of the grimoire, and the camera's trying to find her because Cynthia's all over the place during the shot, and it's really kind of messy and really wonderful at the same time. You could feel like just her really struggling with, like, how does she process what is happening to Fiyero, and can she, anything that she does leads to tragedy, and that no good deed goes unpunished. And so to end up seeing that performance for Cynthia, and by the way, this was later on where we sort of revisited the dailies, and we're like, how can we bring up No Good Deed a notch? And we say, okay, this is improv. That she's supposed to be on the other side of Chemical Castle during this particular part of this. The continuity is going to be all messed up here if we end up staying on Cynthia here. But the power of that performance ended up, dictating where we should be in the edit. And then there's the tiny things like, back to no, for good, Ari's little nose sort of twitch moment where she's, looking at Elphaba, like those little tiny little details that you find very late in these little tiny gems, you end up finding, you end up incorporating into the edit. And then, there's other things like um, uh, this the structure of like Girl in the Bubble. Like there's something that Ari did on the day where she's looking at the mirror for the first time and she's saying, "Look," and we ended up stripping away all the orchestration and making it feel very. There was just something so vulnerable about that moment. There used to be all this beautiful music that Stephen Schwartz had put in there, and we rip it all away. And as John described, Ariana Grande is now sort of like she's no longer Glinda. She's Ariana Grande in a costume, and you could hear the footsteps, and it feels almost meta in a way. But because that it feels so vulnerable and interesting, that ends up like um, uh, really sort of making your edit into this different thing, And then they have that moment with Ariana Grande after the betrayal scene where we just hold on her and we don't cut away from her for a good couple minutes, and she's just describing. You could hear Morble and the Wizard, planning away in the background, out of focus in the background. We just held on Ari's performance because it was just the most incredible performance. There was no way I was going to cut away from her, And that, I had options. I always have options. But you just see that the improv of the performance is just so spectacular. They're like, that's going to make it into the edit.
Yeah, and we like the camera. That's the first time we do handheld on Ariana, and in No Good, and all through the first movie we do handheld on Cynthia, but because she's raw and real, and we put Glinda's sort of center punched and in bubbles and circles and treated in an old Hollywood classic way, but not until this moment on Ariana where her world is completely breaking do we shoot that scene on handheld. And it's this moment where we do just sit with her, and I dimmed off all the lights in the control room except for the perimeter lights and just lit her with one teeny light so that you can see her eyes. And John runs up to me, he's like, we can see her, right? And I said, yes, don't worry. And he's like, okay, she's giving everything here. And Karsten, our steady cam operator, or our a camera operator, just like slowly gets closer and closer and closer to her, and as he comes around her, and it's just this really this moment that we haven't seen with her before in terms of the way we've treated her camera wise. I mean, never in a million years would I have only lit her with one teeny little light before in this movie, because she's Glinda, right? She's Glinda the good, and this is the moment she truly becomes wicked.
It's just so wonderful hearing these examples. I appreciate how much detail you both are going into with these. What another scene that I want to dig into, Rafaela was asking, and so is Leah, about the intercutting between Glinda's wedding and Elphaba fighting the animals. Which thank you both in the audience for asking about that, because that was one of my favorites as well. Rafaela says, I assume the choice was made in pre-pro already, but did you change part of the plan while editing, or did you find new ways of arranging the shots? She would love to hear more about the process of shooting and cutting that sequence.
So the two spaces, like if you took a cross section of Emerald City, the secret prison is right underneath the Hall of Grandiosity where the wedding happens, and you've got these sort of parallel staircases that they were going to descend. And we actually, this was a sequence that we actually shot within a few days of each other. And so there, we were shooting very similar shots as they're both moving from right to left, or we're dead center in front of them as we mirror them. And the color contrast is quite dramatic. Glinda's world is yellow and pink, and the wedding is yellow lights bouncing off the butterflies, and the pink. There's just a pink glow everywhere else, whereas Elphaba is descending these staircases, and we just used one huge light that we pushed down the stairs, and so there's simplicity to the way we're shooting Elphaba's shots, Elphaba's lighting versus a lot going on in Glinda's, where we dim up these lights that create lens flares as she's walking. And so we created this sort of symmetry between the shots. And Myron cut it beautifully together. But then what happened, Myron? There was a moment when they weren't together.
Well, yeah, there was definitely scripted. They actually weren't sort of scripted to be intercut in that way, but obviously I was seeing similar sort of these mirrors between these two locations, and of course the studio was like, well, we really want the wish fulfillment of Ariana Grande, being, seeing that wedding. Like, you don't want to actually get in the way of that. But what we found is, as we intercut these scenes more and more, that we elevated each of these scenes, and you saw the grandeur and delight of Oz, and then the worst part of Oz at the same time. And so that the two of them combined in that way really really, I think, elevated both. I also wanted to give out a shout out to Tatiana Regal, who I also worked with, and she helped me sort of find my way in that sequence. And then Drew Buckland, who later also worked on the whole wedding sequence. It was a whole team effort. And then, Frame Store and Opsis and ILM all working on these incredible, VFX with the animals and the butterflies, and then John Powell finally coming through with this beautiful score, which is basically a riff off of Popular, and all that coming together. Really took the course of 3 years to like figure out how to make that all work, and then the R&D, and then stealing assets, VFX assets from the first movie, and then whether or not we could create any other animals, and that all culminating into this sort of Day of a Locust sort of stampede, and they were destroying everything. Was just, I don't know, I was really proud about how that all came together, and that the whole team, was able to riff off each other. And then, how beautiful that, John, you probably have heard this before, but John likes us to think big, dream big, and then you have something like that wedding. John already has a Crazy Rich Asians wedding, and then he's like, I want to beat that, I want to top that, that, and it's like, okay, how hard could that be? Alice, Nathan,
Well, it's
Paul,
interesting because this is the first time you and I have talked about the fact that it's sort of like, what is this feeling? So yes.
I know, it's crazy. It's crazy.
It like we were shooting it as if it were an intercut, but and the same thing. John and I were shooting "What Is This Feeling" as if it or as split screens, but we don't tell Myron anything. He's left in the dark. But John, I mean, he's left in the dark to some degree. We talk on the phone every night at Wrap, but there are certain things John doesn't share with him. Like, we don't share boards with Myron, so that Myron, he really wants Myron to be the fresh perspective on things that we have been talking about for months and months and months. And so Myron cuts "What Is This Feeling?" and we're like, oh, this is amazing, exactly what it's supposed to be. And he's like, what do you mean?
I'm like, what? What do you mean? And you're like, I never talked to you about this.
And then the same thing with the wedding. Like, we were designing shots so that they matched. And so anyway, and I think were they not scripted either? Maybe if they weren't scripted, our script at some points like changed quickly, and so maybe there was never real script pages where they were intercut.
all I know is I'm so relieved that it came together the way it did, because it did feel like it was all designed in this way that felt very yeah, again, magical, and that, that you could that I could feel the sort of how it was supposed to be. But it is tough when you're dealing with a lot of voices in your head, and so it's great when Alice and John don't tell me too much, or
Yeah.
I say don't tell me anything, because I do want that fresh perspective. And then when the studio comes in and whatnot, they're another set of voices, and they have, they've made a big bet with us, and so they want to deliver to the fans, and and these incredible trailer moments, and make sure that everyone feels that delight, and that it feels special, that it's and that the darkness, it feels earned. And so I'm just so relieved that Mark Platt was able to protect us,
Yeah.
and allow us to make this version of the wedding, and that it lives in this way.
Yeah, because I mean the way Myron cut this, like the he had many different ways he could have cut this together in terms of like shot pattern and how long he lingers on Cynthia as she walks down the stairs and using the top shot for both of them. I mean, it was just anyway. I love it's one of my favorite sequences in the movie.
Mine as well. I did not realize that Drew Buckland and Tatiana Regal were part of that process of putting it together. I mean, two wonderful editors. So I'm glad that you mentioned them. We had Drew on to talk about A Complete Unknown earlier this year.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
so
Yeah, I
anyway,
mean, Tatiana, I, Tanya, Corella, is, and Drew Buckland cut, Ford versus Ferrari and Complete Unknown, and to be able to go to both of them and say, what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? How can we each, work off each other and build, and and thank goodness I had them in my back pocket for sure. So
Alice,
it would not be the sequence that it was without them, for sure.
Same.
going off of that, Alice, before I get to a question from the audience for you, Myron, do you remember any specific contributions that Drew and Tatiana had to that sequence that made you either rethink it or see it in a new way, or that you were just like, wow, I'm so glad that they are working alongside me on this sequence because this was brilliant.
I think it's just a matter of just having another set of eyes to say, okay, are we on the right track? There wasn't any one sort of like, moment. I think it's just like, I recut it this way. What do you think? Well, I did this version. How do we build up the tension? Like, the wedding, especially the Stampede, used to go on forever. So when I took it over, I was, cutting it down and restructuring it quite a bit. There's just a lot of things that you end up working where you just riff off each other. But, for me, it was just like always having a fresh set of eyes. I was drowning when I was assembling both movies. So Tatiana helped me finish the assembly, and then she went away, and then I was on my own for a good 9 months. And then when the Altadena fires happened, I was just like, I need help somehow. I was affected by it, so I just needed the help, and so that's when Drew came on to help me for a couple months. And so I'm just really thankful to have had them.
That's lovely. It's nice to hear about the fact that you had a really supportive team of co-editors who helped you with this. Alice, Sadie from our audience, and Shalome, Kiara, and Swan had a similar question. Said, I love how you slowly allowed for the rainbow to represent various characters' relationships. How did you decide to use complementary colors, orange to represent Elphaba's transformation and blue to represent the love of Glinda and Elphaba?
So blue was I think, well, for the very first color. So let me backtrack. All through camera prep in London, we were doing weekly camera tests where we would be testing everything from costume design to makeup to hair, and I was doing these lighting tests of trying to find each color of the rainbow. And Pink was the very first one we found because Popular was going to be our first number. So once we found that first, but then the Ozdas Ballroom was the second, and it's a clear resin set, and so we could we could backlight it any color we wanted. And when we found our blue, that became the color of their love. And then No Good Deed is the reason of the orange, which is Elphaba's transformation. So she lights the fire, right? And so now you have orange, and it's orange flame. It's a very specific orange. It's the color of orange flame, and we use real flame light at Kiamako Castle, and and so we carefully placed, or our department carefully placed torches all around, and they were these massively huge torches that just created this beautiful flickering light on their faces. But then you're bathed in the coolness of the moonlight. So each one, and then the tornado is purple, and it represents destruction, and that was the very last. Whereas pink was the very first color, purple was the very last color, and I couldn't quite figure out where to put purple in in this. And I was doing looking for tornado images, I kept finding all these amazing tornadoes, but they were all green. And then I remembered the story of my dad. My dad used to direct plays, dinner theater around the country before I was born. And the very last play he did was in Texas, and my mom was very pregnant with me. And my dad loved movies. It's why I love movies. And they were watching a movie, and it was the very last reel was playing, and the manager comes in and says, "There's a tornado, everyone needs to get out." And my dad looks at my mom, he's like, "We're going to watch the rest of this movie." And so they watch the rest of the movie, and they go outside, and all the cars are flipped everywhere. But he always described the color of the after the tornado as this violet color, and I realized purple should be the color of the tornado. And one of my very favorite shots in the movie, well, I love Madame Warble churning the tornado, and you see the violets start to come on her, but then with Fierro, as he meets Chistery, there's this shot where the wind's blowing up at him, and he's on the cliffside, and it's a medium shot on him, and the purple is just glowing on his face, and he has a white shirt on, and so the purple's even more amplified. Anyway, that's sort of it. All was as we like to keep saying, our movie is handmade. It all comes from all different areas of aspects of life.
I have to ask you, Alice, what movie were they sitting through? Do you know?
I don't remember, and my dad passed away when I was in my 20s, and my mother has dementia, so I will never know.
That's okay. That is such a beautiful story, though. I love the fact that that was something that came from your life, and that you were able to imbue this film with something like that. I want to ask you both, from Twana, Trista, Kalia, and Jed. What was the most challenging part of shooting and editing this film? Were there any particular scenes that gave you more trouble than others and really forced you to think differently about your craft?
Oh, wow. Well, look, I think that every movie has its challenges. For me, the tone of the second film was a real challenge for me. I really had to, even from the production standpoint, I was calling up Alice and John and saying the tone of this is so different than the first film, and I really had to embrace it and find a ways to connect to it, and also find a ways for the audience to connect to it and drop in and embrace the tonal shifts, the melodramatic feeling, the operatic, that this was a tragedy. And there was a lot of, I was playing constantly with the structure and what scenes should be in and out, what songs should be in and out, what characters should be in and out. And, beginnings and ends are always a really tough thing with any movie. And I found at the beginning of this film, we had a lot of options as far as like what scene. We used to have a scene where we would build the yellow brick road. You'd see the bricks actually being built by the Munchkins, and that this was this montage, and it was a bit of a misdirect. And it was great. It was actually a really great opening, but it was another opening, and so trying to find the balance of everything just took a lot of time and experimentation, and then all leading into how to like really kind of then drop into this tone with Nessa and Bach, and accept that this is a bigger story, and that they are miserable with one each other, and that the audience has to like feel that slow burn and not rush it. And then somebody asked earlier about like there was things about did you learn from the first film? Well, people love when these two characters are together, and these two characters are going to be apart for half of the movie. And so I had to treat it like the shark from Jaws, where wait for it, and when you get there, that it's going to feel really satisfying. Um, and then to then balance that, and then cut sequences like Wonderful, which is just one of my favorite sequences in the movie. And then you feel that delight in the wizard, and then fast forward all the way through all this other melodrama, and then to deliver emotionally and for good, and then to carry that for another 5-10 minutes, all the way to the end of the movie, and that you feel that emotion build. It just took a lot of experimentation. We were so exhausted after making the first movie, and then we were just like, "Yay, we did it! This is great!" And then everyone's just like, "Yeah, we'll get back to work." And the celebration's over, kid, and get back into the edit room. And I was, look, I was so grateful to be working for 3 years when so many people were not working. I was just felt extremely just so much gratitude that I was, that I could, work on these incredible films. But it was also just like it was just daunting. And so to get to the other side of that, and then and to make sure that we could still communicate with our thousands of artists, and that it wasn't like a just a mess, and then to land the emotion, yeah, it was just a remarkable feat. I'm not sure. I could think of maybe Back to the Future 2 and 3, or like maybe like the Lord of the Rings or Hunger Games in comparison, but there wasn't really a model for us about how to do this. And when we finished the first film, we were like, we have thousands of VFX to get to the pipeline, and we're still making the edit, and we have music. And so anyways, it was just a Herculean feat to get through and to deliver in some way that felt emotional, and it felt complete, like we had landed the plane.
Alice, what about you? I want to close off by hearing from you. What was the most challenging aspect of this? Were there any scenes that gave you particular trouble that you really just had to push through and come up with a creative solution for?
I mean, Girl in the Bubble was definitely one of the harder things that we did. But every day was this immense challenge. I mean, we had to shoot 20 musical numbers over the course of 155 days, which seems like a lot of days, but it actually isn't very many days to shoot 20 musical numbers plus all the dialogue scenes. And I had a team of 200 people in the grip, electric, and camera teams, departments. And and I feel so lucky for how supported I was by my team of people. But every day we walk onto set and something new was going to happen, whether it's the rainbow of light that we had to create in the wizard's throne room that took 2 weeks that we go in every night at wrap and see Chris Scott's choreography while the programmer had been in there all day working on this swirl of beautiful light, and that goes up 45 feet in the air, or I guess Wonderful probably was one of the biggest challenges now that I'm on Wonderful, where John Chu always said, I want it to feel like the Peter Pan ride, but no one understood that he actually wanted a Peter Pan ride. And so the whole set is built, and he wanted a ride, like a track, like a roller coaster track for them to ride on. And we were supposed to shoot in 3 weeks, and we couldn't move it. We only had Jeff Goldblum for a total of 4 weeks. And so then this ride, the special effects figured out how to fit the ride in the space. But then I need to figure out how to get a crane in the space and no walls move out of the way, because the set has been constructed and they're supporting walls. So then finally we figure out how to get a crane in that will carry Elphaba and Glinda down for the entire piece of this music track at a certain speed. but then where are the lights going to go? Because we only rigged bicolor lights in there because we weren't expecting to do any color lights. And so now we have to rig, and we ended up using these very lightweight lights that the gaffer had made, called candy lights, that were full RGB. So anyway, every day was a new challenge. I mean, that's why I love working with John. It's because he brings new ideas every single day, and you just grow and grow and grow with those ideas, and you rise to the challenge, and it's really a remarkable way to work.
Oh, I have to say, Alice, that is the perfect way to close us off for this evening. Thank you for sharing that. I did not know that Wonderful changed so much right before you were about to shoot. Myron and Alice, thank you so much for being here again. It was such a pleasure seeing you. I could have spent another hour with you. This has been such a pleasure. I really appreciate you both taking the time to be here tonight with us.
As always, thank you so much for having us, Joshua.
Yeah, thank you, Joshua. It's really, and we ended up not crying, so I feel really good about this.
Thank you to
It's been
everybody
wonderful.
in our audience for being here tonight, and to those who are joining us for our next two encores. Quick announcement as to what we have upcoming. Our next Q&A will be this Wednesday night on One Battle After Another. Thursday afternoon will be Sentimental Value. Then we just announced a Q&A with Ryan Johnson and Bob Doucet on Wake Up Dead Man and Knives Out Mystery, which will be happening in January. And we have four Q&As next week as well. They're all free. They're on our website, theqagency.com. We are at the Q&A Agency on social. Good night, everybody. Alice and Myron, thank you again. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.